My name is Abby Fitzgerald, and I'm here to talk about my residential honors capstone, which I've decided to call Gone Fishing. This was inspired by my marine biological study investigating how plastic, both large and small, can harm coral reefs. Now, previous studies have shown that all types of plastic can do serious damage to coral reefs. They can all carry with them pathogens, pollutants, and oftentimes invasive species, which can lead to mass disease outbreaks and oftentimes mass mortality in coral. Now, the original purpose of the study was to look into how the different sizes of plastic can harm coral reefs differently. Previous studies have shown that large plastics does more physical damage to the coral. They can kill a coral through suffocation. Just by, like any species, coral has to breathe, and if the plastic gets stuck over the coral or wrapped around too tight, it can make it difficult for them to breathe. Shading, which is where a large chunk of plastic, which has a large group of plastic, is covering the coral. Now, coral have a tiny little symbiotic algae that lives inside them, which helps them to make food through, in part, photosynthesis. This isn't the only way corals can feed. They can also catch foods themselves, just very small, tiny plankton. But without the help of their algae friends, a lot of times they end up starving. This is what a lot of times will kill coral when they bleach, is they lose their algae friends, and they have no way to get food aside from hunting, which a lot of times that's just based on luck, whether or not they find a good plankton nearby. So shading is just where they're covered, no sunlight, and like a plant, it's not good. They can't get any food. And finally, large plastic can do damage to coral just by straight up hitting it. Just like any large chunk of something in the ocean, it can hit it, it can cause scrapes, or it can break off large chunks of the coral, which depending on the species can be fatal. It can also just straight up cause infections based on what it was carrying with it. If it was carrying with it a different dangerous pathogen or some invasive species, that could do a lot of damage to the coral colony. Now, small plastic, on the other hand, is more dangerous just from the stuff it carries with it, like all plastics it carry with them, all the sorts of dangerous stuff we were talking about earlier, pathogens, pollutants, invasive species. But by the time something has reached that small size, a lot of times it's just through the weathering from being in the ocean for such a long time. A lot of the microplastics you see started out being these giant chunks of plastic, like most of the other plastic that ends up in the ocean. But it's broken down just from storms, from the waves, just from all the stuff that's in the ocean. Over the course of a few years, it can break it down into the small size you see on beaches or in documentaries. So a lot of times this stuff has been in the ocean for a long time. They've traveled a long distance, and such is often a culprit when it comes to carrying with them pollutants or invasive species from far away. Additionally, small plastic can be eaten by the coral. As we talked about earlier, corals do have a way of hunting. They eat plankton, which is very tiny, microscopic a lot of the times. And microplastics end up being that size. They can catch them as well, and this can result in gut blockages. Now, scientists aren't exactly sure what this does to the coral. We know that it can remain in their system for over a day, which of course is dangerous, but we're still looking into how this affects the coral overall, the coral can recover from this, or if this is just the end of the coral. But I did not have the time to look into that, so I was more looking into the correlation between the abundance of the plastic nearby on the beach to how healthy the reef is itself. We're looking into if there's a large amount of large plastic or small plastic just sitting on the beach, see how that would affect the health of the corals in the reef. As a lot of times the plastic is washing in from the ocean or came from the ocean. We were hoping that would be a good way to try to get a correlation without sampling in the ocean, as it's a little hard to sample plastic in the water. You have to do a bit of diving to collect it, and a lot of times it can just wash away. So I was hoping to see if there's a way just to look into it on the beach, see if that could find any correlation. Now, the purpose of this piece was to try to find a different way to talk about scientific studies that makes it more accessible to the general public. Science communication is a huge challenge for science, especially today. A lot of the times things get lost in translation from trying to convert something from a scientific field to a political field to a media field to even just a different branch of science. Marine biologists trying to talk to geneticists. Sometimes things can get lost in translation. In addition, a lot of times scientific talks are just difficult to focus on, difficult to get emotionally attached to and passionate about. Scientists do their best to try and remain objective as possible when talking about our work. We try to let the data speak for itself just to show that we have no bias whatsoever. This is just what we saw, and this is what happened. And this has its advantages, but it is hard to create an emotional attachment and to get invested in this topic when just reading through pages and pages of data or all this, trying to work through all this scientific jargon. It's very difficult. I have that same problem. I know I zone out so much when trying to listen to a talk if I'm not familiar with the subject already, or even looking through the papers for my own talk, for my own project. It was very difficult to do. A lot of times I found myself zoning out just from the pages and pages of data. So this was a way to try and make it a bit more accessible to the general public, also so just it's not behind that paywall and you don't have to be in person or Skype into the talk. You can just look at this piece and hopefully at least understand the general idea of what I'm trying to talk about, how plastics are dangerous to coral, not just the sea turtles and the dolphins and all that other stuff. And hopefully this is made in a way that is memorable and will have people thinking about it when they go home and talk about it with their friends. So the piece itself is made from a copper wire structure with an epoxy clay body. Epoxy is just this, it's a type of clay. When you combine the two pieces of it together, it makes a very easy to work with clay that dries quickly and it still remains fairly strong, which worked perfect for this piece. As I did not have a kiln or anything fancy to work with, I was just in my own living room. This piece also has embedded in the body and around it the plastics which were collected over the study I was talking about earlier. The base is made from driftwood and the smaller chunks of plastics, while the larger plastics are used to surround the base and to decorate the coral itself. The sea creatures you see here, such as the fish, the octopus, and the eel, were made from an epoxy clay as well and were painted using just basic acrylic paint. The results of the study were a bit complicated, as most scientific studies are. We didn't find any correlation between the density of plastic and the health of the reef. Now, this doesn't mean that the plastic isn't harming the reef or having any effect on it whatsoever. Many previous studies have talked about and demonstrated how plastic can harm coral. It's just that the method we used in our study wasn't very good at capturing what the plastic can do. We found that the plastic varies a lot in the short term, from just feet apart on the beach to the different days, the time of day you sample. We found that the large plastic and the small plastic had different abundances based on the day, which suggests that they're arriving from different methods. And there are also many other factors that could have played a part in how the reef was doing. There were other pollutants, there was tourism, there was bleaching events. A lot of other factors could have played a huge part in how the health of the coral reef was. That wasn't the plastic. So basically we need to do a little more study, but I was hoping that this piece still talks about the importance of corals and how plastic can harm them. I just want to say thank you to everyone who helped me out with this project. This was a huge project and I could not have done this without you. This was my first time attempting something in 3D. I'm used to working in 2D, so I learned a lot over the course of this project. It is so hard trying to get something to look beautiful and still stand upright and try to dangle things without the things holding it up being too obvious or trying to make it work. So much respect to the people who do this full time. I can't imagine. I've never felt so big and clumsy than when I was working on this piece. But thank you so much to Dr. Quest, my advisor, and my family who helped me out so much with this piece. I hope you guys like it. I'll just let you take a good look at it for a little while for the rest of this video. And if you have any questions about the piece or the project or the study, feel free to give me a comment. This will be on my YouTube channel, so feel free. I'll try to look into it and answer as best as I can. But yeah, thanks again, and have a good day, everyone. Stay safe.